Good morning, and thank you all for being with us today. It's been a great RSA, I think. Weather's been lovely, really great to meet old friends, and feels like a community, a tribe. We've got 50 minutes. What we wanted to do is share with you the findings of a research that we've concluded. It's the beginning of a dialogue, so there isn't a whole lot of prescription that it ends with, but I hope we can start engaging and work towards it. I'm Rashmi Chatterjee. I'm the CEO of Istari, which is Temasek's global cybersecurity platform. For those of you who don't know Temasek, it's one of the world's largest investors, headquartered out of Singapore, with over $500 billion in assets around the world. So we are a new business that they set up 3 years back on cybersecurity, investment portfolio of companies with a layer of very senior and seasoned cybersecurity professionals above that. I want to talk to you a little bit about the story of Istari, not because I want to talk about Istari, but it's a background to this research. So I was in New York running global sales for IBM Security, and Temasek approached me and said that they wanted to set up a global cybersecurity platform, the CEO of Temasek. And we got into a dialogue, and I said, why? What exactly? And he was very clear. He said, the biggest risk to my capital that's invested around the world, people say geopolitics, people say supply chain, people say inflation. We've seen that. That's happened for thousands of years. Geopolitics, not a new word. Neither is inflation, neither is supply chain. Even natural calamities. But the risk that is the greatest that can completely jeopardize my capital is cyber. And I don't believe that it is being addressed in the right way, at the right level, with the right ownership, with the right processes. It's quite a sort of fragmented and noisy market. And ultimately, all the companies that we have invested in are moving very fast on digital transformation. I want you to help me make sure they're doing this while building a very strong foundation to the digital business. So a very intriguing value proposition. So left New York, moved to London, set up Istari. And it really this has been the question all along, which is what is the role a foundation plays in a digital business? And how are the leaders thinking about it? Everyone knows that cybersecurity is top CEO concern. But is it a top CEO concern as a place of mystery? Like, this is really important, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Or is it a place of concern with understanding? Most CEOs understand financial risk. They understand legal risk. They know that there is cyber risk. Do they understand it? And there's so much information, so many articles and protocols. This is what a CEO should do. This is what they shouldn't do. And we said, well, let's step back for a minute and let's not assume we have anything to tell. Let's hear them out. So that's how we started the research. I'm going to start by introducing Manuel. Manuel is a head of insights and thought leadership. Again, a small story there. I've always believed that cybersecurity should not be seen as the cost. We've all heard it, insurance, the brakes of a car. I don't think it's that. I think it's a strategic advantage. I think if you have 10 houses on a row and one is more secure, and then something goes wrong on the street and that house is the only house standing, that's not a break, that's an advantage. And in digital world, in digital businesses, any business that is much more serious about being resilient will stand longer. So, I've always believed this, and came across an article in the MIT Sloan about why cybersecurity is a strategic asset to businesses. Very curious, asked our team to go and find who was the author. It was Manuel. Found him, spoke to him, asked him, will you come and join us? And he's been with us now, over 2 years? So let me hand over to Manuel to share a little bit about context. And yeah, we'll try to finish in about 35, 40 minutes. Would love to hear questions, but keep the dialogue going.
Thank you, and good morning as well. What I'd like to do is start this presentation with a quote. And that quote says, it's from a CEO who suffered a major attack. And the CEO said, whenever I speak to a group of CEOs, to share my findings and learnings and lessons from the attack, I start my presentation by saying, put down your phones for 15 minutes. You'll want to listen carefully to what I have to tell you. And I think it's an interesting quote, but I want to tell you the story of that CEO and how that quote ended up being the quote that he told me. And so now let's rewind a little bit in time. And it's actually, this story starts not with the CEO, but with the chief information officer in a large global business. And the CIO of that business was just 3-4 weeks into his new job. And he was actually standing outside the corporate headquarters getting photography done for the corporate website, for the About the Management team section of the website. And he was with the photographer, and the photographer was taking photos of him, but the photographer demanded that he remove the phones that he was carrying in his jacket because they were ruining the photo shoot. So the CIO, we'll call him James for now, it's not his real name. James handed over his 2 phones to his executive assistant, and the photo shoot continued. When all of a sudden, both phones from James started to ring in the hands of the executive assistant. And at first, the EA ignored the phone calls, although it was quite unusual that both of the phones would ring simultaneously. But as they kept ringing, she interrupted the photo shoot, handed the phones to James, and James answered, and on the other end of the line was one of his direct reports. And the direct report was sitting in a different country, and he is responsible for the command and control center of that business. It's not the SOC, it's the command and control center that analyzes and tracks the business operations. And the reason why he was so keen to speak to James was because they were seeing anomalous activity in a certain area of that company where there should have been business as usual. And he thought that was interesting. So he picked up the phone, he called James, and he was telling him. And while the two were speaking, all of a sudden in that room, all of the screens went black. And this is a room that doesn't have a natural source of light, so it was pitch black. And we all know what the message looked like. This isn't usual. It's a story that happens all over the world. But what they were seeing on these massive arrays of screens, 10-meter longs, was this ransomware note. And that's when the two on the phone decided to turn off the entire network and technology of that business. Now, for a business of that size and scale, there's no red button. Most of you know this. So it takes about 5 to 6 hours to shut down the global technology of that business. And so they decided to do that. James hung up the phone. Obviously, he didn't continue with the photo shoot. And he thought maybe this is something where he has to inform his chief executive officer that something's happening. So he was walking back to the corporate headquarters, and he was entering the building. And as he was navigating his way through the corridors to the elevators, he was seeing that people were standing around, confused, because they had also seen their computers being infected by that ransomware note. And that's when James realized, by the way, this was a completely different country in this world. That's when he realized this was a global issue. So he walked up to the elevators, took the elevators down to the top floor, walked into the office of the chief executive officer, and said, "Hey, I think we've got a problem." The CEO said, "I know," because he'd also seen that ransomware message. So as the story continued, they realized that they'd lost all of their IT infrastructure, they'd lost their Active Directory, they'd lost pretty much everything. So the business was on its knees. And then fast forward a couple of months, I was sitting in that CEO's office, and I was interviewing him. And he had taken 1.5 hours out of his busy schedule to walk me through his experience. And I was asking him, "Tell me the story, tell me your story, what happened." And I still remember to this day what he said to me. And I remember 2 things. And the first thing that he said to me, and bear in mind, this is a multi-billion-dollar business. The first thing he said to me, before the attack, it was completely impossible to think that anything could put us out of business. And the second, maybe even more surprising thing he said to me was, this was the worst experience in my career. Because for the first time, I had no intuition, I had no intuitive idea of what to do and how to move forward. And I thought this is interesting. So I joined Astari, and I wanted to drill into that conversation, right? I wanted to systematically find out how CEOs engage in cybersecurity risk, how they manage it, how they build resilience in their enterprises. And we all know that in the cybersecurity community, there's been a lot of talk for a decade about how cybersecurity is an executive top management topic. It needs to be led from the top. But I don't think anybody's ever actually asked CEOs in a systematic way how they do it, how they engage with it, and how they grapple with the issues they're facing. So we were curious.
Yeah. So, we hold CEO events around the world. We hold chair events around the world. We always get great attendance. So obviously this is something that's important. But as Manuel said, we were curious to understand how are they feeling about this big priority amongst the top 3. Multiple publications will tell you, some will tell you it's number 1. But how are they thinking about it? What do they feel? And is there a difference between CEOs who've lived through an attack and those who have not? And what's the difference? And what can we do? What can we understand better there? And the third is, I'm sure many of you prepare for the boards, are on boards. We have few things that have happened the last year. Every board meeting, at least once every 2 quarters, the board must have a cybersecurity session. Dutifully, we present the NIST, orange, red, green. How do CEOs feel about that? Is that a tick on the box that, yep, I have somebody on my board who gets cyber, we have cyber on the board every time we see the framework, we look at the audit reports. Does that feel like enough? Does that make them feel more comfortable, less comfortable? What do they feel about it? So that was a curiosity we started out with. And the research, in addition, like I said, we've covered over 100 CEOs around the world in various aspects, not just the research, but events. But the research, we had 37 CEOs give us more than an hour and a half. It was CEO only. Average revenue 12 billion, you can read it, but 9 out of the 37 had experienced a successful attack. And it was across the world. And the span, we had the top 3 bank, one of the top 3 banks in the US, one of the top 3 banks in Europe, one of the top 3 banks in Asia. We had media, we had critical infrastructure, we had food distribution, so it was quite a big span. We're really trying to get much more of diversity. Obviously you talk to 37 financial CEOs, very different, very regulated, very aware of some of the risks. So that was the research that we did. And I think we came away with 3 main things. The first is CEOs are much more comfortable with the word cyber resiliency versus cyber security. All CEOs see resiliency as part of their mission. They know that there will be a lot of issues in their tenure. And one of their jobs is, the issue could be like a generational issue like the pandemic. But one of their jobs is to be resilient in those times. So the word resilience really resonates. The second thing we discovered is there has to be a shift. There are some mindset shifts that have to take place with the CEOs based on our learnings from the CEOs who've been attacked. So, today if you talk to many CEOs, they'll tell you a few things. Absolutely top of my mind. I have a fabulous CISO. I have put in so much money. I don't know if I yet feel more secure, but I'm doing everything from my side. And there was a little bit more, is that enough? And then the third was, what can we do to help them be more effective in driving and building this strong foundation? And one of the things we strongly believe that any CEO in this digital transformative world, it is their job to leave behind a better foundation, a more cyber secure, cyber resilient foundation than the one they inherited. Otherwise, the digital transformation is very superficial and it's quite risky. Just a little bit about cybersecurity. So when we were starting to set up these interviews, it was interesting because the first thing the CEO would say, can I have my CISO in the room with me? And we'd say, no, it's okay. It's just, can it be just you and us? And there was a lot of discomfort, to and fro. Well, I'm not really a technical guy. Don't worry, no problem. Can we just talk to you for an hour? And we came mostly through the investor or the board, so they did give us their time. And Manuel started the discussion very well. In every case, he started by, how do you feel about resilience? And you could literally see the oxygen come into the room. Let's step back. Everybody in the last 20 years, I mean, we've had a pandemic, a war, few wars, we've had inflation, we've had convergence with geopolitics, decoupling, a lot of things. And CEOs this is their job. They think about it all the time, how to anticipate, how to withstand, how to build a more resilient company. So the moment we talked about cyber resilience, the word resilience, the conversation became much, much easier. And actually, in all cases, it went beyond an hour. And in all cases, they said, please feel free. I mean, obviously, share the research, but we'd love to have a follow-up. So I think that was one. Yeah, I guess that's, I think just the net was cyber security, for some reason, they associate with technology, lots of tools, lots of products. Cyber resilience, they associate with the quality of business they lead. So that was a good conversation. Just some aspects that we felt came out in the conversation. Cybersecurity, is this IT? Is this IT plus production? Is it COO? It seemed departmental. Cyber resilience, resilience is their job. So that came out. You know, the idea of anticipation, and I mean, we all know that we don't know anything enough about the threat landscape. It's changing every day, and it is the digital threat surface area is increasing so fast, so we don't even know where it's going to hit and what. So the idea of trying to always prevent versus trying to spend time on preparedness, I think that resonated very well. Protection versus adaptation. Again, how do I learn from the process? Not just by adding more tools, but how do I learn from the process what I need to do to anticipate and to be able to protect? A big, big conversation around threat to risk. You know, threat is unlimited. Resources, money and people are not unlimited. So at some point, cyber has to become a very calm risk discussion. The stridency of, oh my God, look what's happening now, this happened, and tomorrow this happened, this company went down. Yes, that happens, it's interesting. But at some point, this has to become a risk discussion. And just as complicated financial, complicated legal aspects have become risk discussions, the only difference is on finance, on law, we have many hundreds years of experience. Cyber is still new. It's 30, 40, whatever, 50 years old. Digital is still new. So there's not enough practice, there's not enough information, not enough data, which is why you see that even in the cyber insurers, right? They go and then they come back because there's just not enough data to know how bad is what and what should be the average cost. So threat to risk is really important because we cannot live in a world where we keep telling the CEO that the risk is infinite and somehow you have to help me with the money and the people. There is got to be a discussion which says, this is the risk landscape for our company. This is what's most important. This is what I'm going to do now, and this is what I'm going to do later. And by the way, whatever I think has low probability of happening can still happen. But this is why we are prioritized our roadmap. I think the whole idea of continuous, you know, not just, I'm going to do 6 projects, budget, don't have budget, can't do projects, am I less secure, am I more secure? It's kind of a pointless loop. So point in time versus, and then this whole idea of collective, you know, is this an IT problem or, I mean, when the business goes down, every employee is in the game. So that was sort of the big learning on resilience. And, you know, I really admired, I was part of most of the conversation, admired the way Manuel, I think, started with resilience because completely changed the discomfort of I'm not a tech person and can I have my CISO with me. Maybe talk a little bit about the mindsets that we saw.
So we did the interviews, we analyzed the data. One main finding was that CEOs are more interested in building resilience than engaging in cybersecurity. But a lot of them said to us, I'm scared. What do you want me to do, right? And when we analyzed the data and we compared those CEOs who'd been through an attack with those that had not been through an attack, there was a couple of things that emerged. And there's two aspects that Rashmi said. One is the way that CEOs think about cyber and cyber resilience. And there's a second part to that is how they act on that. And the first part, we discovered that there's four mindset shifts that are useful and CEOs have to adapt. And the first one is what we call be co-responsible, not just accountable for cyber resilience. And I'm going to go through each of them in closer detail now. The second one is embrace the preparedness paradox. The third one is move from blind trust to a state of informed trust. And the fourth one is adapt your communication styles to regulate stakeholder pressure. So let's go through each of them very quickly. And there's a bit of data that we can show and share with you. So the first one about being co-responsible and versus accountable. Each of the CEOs that we spoke with, we asked them, hey, Mr. or Mrs. CEO, do you feel accountable for cybersecurity? Very simple question. And all of the CEOs that we spoke with, without exception, insisted that they did. They said, yeah, of course I am. I'm accountable for everything that happens in this business. But here's something interesting, because we also asked 37 chief information security officers in Europe and in the US whether they believe that their CEO feels accountable. And 50% of the European CISOs did not think that their CEOs felt accountable, and 30% of the CISOs from the US felt that way. So there seems to be a gap between accountability, between the feeling of accountability of what the CEOs think and what the CISOs think their CEOs think. Now, interestingly, the solution to this gap came from one of the CEOs that we spoke with who'd suffered an attack. And he said, this is the quote below, I think CEOs should be moving away from just feeling accountable to the state of being co-responsible with their cybersecurity team and their CISO. And that's an important mindset shift, because accountability usually is associated with being the face of the mistake after something bad happens. Whereas co-responsibility means ongoing engagement before anything goes wrong. It's a subtle change, but the CEO highlighted that this is a really, really important mindset shift that he experienced. So the first mindset shift is don't just feel accountable, Mr. CEO or Mrs. CEO, feel co-responsible. The second one relates to preparedness. And we also asked the CEOs in our interviews how they would intuitively rate their organization's preparedness to respond to a major cyber attack, to a crisis. And bear in mind, this is about preparedness, not about prevention. How well do you think your organization can handle a serious cyber attack? Quite a few of them said, I don't know, I don't want to give you an answer. But of those who responded, rated their preparedness relatively high. You know, we're an 8, we're a 7, we're a 9. But here's where it becomes interesting, because those 9 CEOs that had been through an attack told us that that was one of their biggest regrets. Because they had previously also believed that their organization was well prepared before then recognizing their major mistake. So what we discovered, and we call this the preparedness paradox, is there seems to be an inverse relationship between the perception of feeling well prepared and the actual resilience of the organization. And the reason why that's the case is because the feeling of we're well prepared may lead to complacency, right? Oh, I can delegate this, we're well prepared, I don't need to engage with that. So what we're saying is, rather than seeing preparedness as an achievable end state, yeah, we're a 9, CEOs should see it as a set of ongoing processes and activities that continually challenge the organization's preparedness. So don't ever feel prepared, is the point. Always be ready, but don't feel prepared, because then you're going to get complacent. So the second mindset is embrace the preparedness paradox. Now, the third mindset relates to trust. And every CEO has to trust their team. I hope Rashmi trusts me as well. Every CEO has to trust their marketing teams, their finance teams, all of their teams. But there seems to be something in cybersecurity and the nature of trust that's different. And that is that CEOs told us that another big regret that they have is that they had blindly trusted their cybersecurity teams to do things well. And they saw the absence of a major cyber attack as an indication that their company was on good track. But that wasn't the case. So they said, rather than blindly trusting my cybersecurity teams, I wish I had been a bit better informed. I wish I'd been what we called in the zone of informed trust. And there's a bit of a quote, I mean, you can read that. So instead of blindly trusting advisors and cybersecurity teams, the CEO said, well, I need to engage, and I need to get informed, and I need to build trust that is based on informed trust and not blind trust. So the third mindset shift is move from blind trust, away from that, to a state of informed trust. And the fourth mindset relates to stakeholder pressure. And I was actually surprised when I did the interview how personal the CEOs who'd been through an attack were with us. And I remember one said to me, you know what, Manuel, I've shared things with you that I've only shared with my wife so far. Experiencing a serious cyber attack as a CEO is a major emotional challenge because there's going to be a lot of pressure from customers, stakeholders, shareholders, the board, regulators on the CEO personally to demonstrate that things are going well. And it's an environment of high uncertainty, a lack of knowledge about what's happening. And CEOs told us all of a sudden they were put in the public limelight, they were put on the spotlight. Now, interestingly, and this is actually the statistic that's most quoted when we published the research and was quoted by international media, we asked CEOs if they felt comfortable making decisions in the area of cybersecurity. And interestingly, the majority of them said no. So even though there's a lot of pressure on these CEOs, and it goes back to the quote that I started this presentation with, this was the worst experience of my career. Interestingly, even though there's a lot of pressure on the CEOs, they don't feel comfortable making decisions in that area. And what we discovered then was that CEOs can use that stakeholder pressure in a meaningful way by changing and adapting their communication styles. And what we outline in the research is that there's 4 communication styles that they can use to meaningfully use that pressure. One is the CEO as the transmitter of pressure. So there's no filter, there's pressure coming at the CEO, and the CEO just delegates the pressure down to the organization. Now that, in the case of an attack, might not be the most useful thing to do, right? Think about it as forward the email to my cybersecurity team. The second communication style is an amplifier. So the CEO faces the pressure, and he's just amplifying it. He's even shouting at the cybersecurity team, right? Interestingly, in the absence of a cyber attack, that is actually something that CEOs have to do, right? Now, the third is what we call filter. So there's going to be a lot of pressure from the board, but they selectively pass that pressure on to the organization, depending on the stakeholder, depending on the pressure, and depending on the people that they speak with. And the final one is what we call absorber. And the final one is pretty much that the CEO has to just take up the pressure, absorb it, feel like, and I'm quoting a CEO there, feel like somebody is reaching inside of me and ripping out my guts repeatedly without telling the organization the pressure that he or she is under. So the fourth mindset is adapt different communication styles to balance stakeholder pressure. And let's go to the second part of that, and that is, well, what do CEOs need to do, right? So the first part is how do they need to change their thinking, and the second part is how do they need to act?
Yeah, so just stepping back on the mindset, you know, if you think of what many of us have heard in the last 10 years, I understand cyber is important, I'm the face of the company, I'm accountable, I trust my guys, very good, not enough. That's why the accountable versus co-responsible, defining risk appetite, giving the team an indication of how much risk you're comfortable living with, understanding a little bit more your digital risk landscape. This is co-responsibility. I think blind trust to informed trust, it's very flattering when your CEO says, I trust you completely, but it's also very lonely. So informed trust is good. I trust you, but I really need to understand a bit more of the challenges you face and talk to me more. And there's, of course, a CISO aspect there of business language, and I would just say lack of stridency is the word. There's too much information. I mean, you've seen RSA, lots and lots of things to be talked about. I think preparedness, and then really being thoughtful about what's your North Star, and therefore, how will you manage stakeholder pressure? Is your North Star your employees, your customers, the regulators? What is going to be the most devastating for the organization? So the framework that we talked about is what CEOs need to know is The first step is how to anticipate. We run a program called the Navigator, which is a strategic leadership development program for CISOs. We do it with, we were doing it with Columbia University, now with Cambridge University. And last year in February, we were having our session, the European session in Kitzbühel, when the war broke out between Russia and Ukraine. And all the agenda was stopped because every CEO was calling the CISO to say, what does this mean for me on cyber? So we had to, luckily there were 40 of us in a room, so lots of collective strength. But the ability to anticipate, not just the bad guys' anticipation. I mean, today all of us clearly see 4 or 5 world events that are going to come up. China-US decoupling, what's going to happen in Taiwan. You know, there's clearly things going on that will convert into how supply chain, how capital, how data, how standards are going to be defined. So the ability to anticipate risk, the ability, of course, to withstand the crisis, to respond, but more important, to adapt so that every time it's not a news story. I think that is really what CEOs want to feel comfortable about. And we will share some work we've done. I mean, the whole idea is you should anticipate, intent is that you should have minimal loss to reputation, to business operation, to financials. That is the simplicity that they seek. So we tried to work on some kind of model that would, again, early stages, working on it, but maybe we talk about that a bit.
Yeah, so when we were reflecting on that definition, and that came up in the research, right? The ability to anticipate, withstand, respond, and adapt, to minimize impact, expedite recovery, and emerge stronger. We thought to ourselves, what does that actually mean? How can companies do that practically? And we were looking around, and we found something that actually comes from the area of high reliability organizations, high risk organizations. And like nuclear power plants, train operators, it's organizations that cannot afford to fail. Failure in these companies would lead to catastrophic impacts. And the way that those organizations deal with risk, not cybersecurity, but general risk, is what they call the bow tie model. And we used those words, anticipate, withstand, respond, and adapt, based on the definition, to recreate that model for the world of cybersecurity. And on the left side is something about anticipation. So there's a lot of threats out there, right? And some of those threats are relevant to the organizations, others aren't. And these threats are trying to get to the organization. That's why we, in the world of cybersecurity, put preventive controls in to prevent something bad from happening. If those preventive controls fail, it's all about withstanding, right? Then there's a cyber compromise. Now, a cyber compromise, and we all know this, isn't the high-stakes cyber crisis. It just means that somebody has been successfully penetrated the network. But there's still a couple of reactive controls in place that prevent a crisis from occurring, right? Preventing getting administrative credentials or lateral movement or reconnaissance. Now, if those reactive controls also fail, we've got the crisis, the organizational crisis, the major attack. This is the attack where CEOs feel the pressure, right? But even then, the game isn't lost. Because what we realized was that there's still a whole lot that matters about how the organization responds to that crisis that determines the ultimate impact to financial or to reputation. And so you've got the impact on the right. So this is how organizations in cybersecurity can use the definition of resilience to practically implement that, right? Now, I actually realized that next door there's a presentation on NIST. And NIST came up in some of these conversations with the CEOs as well. And the CEOs told us, yeah, there's all of these frameworks, there's NIST and blah, blah, blah. I don't know how I'm doing. I don't know what good looks like. I get a score. I mean, what does that mean, right? So NIST didn't seem to meet the mark of CEOs, whereas this is pretty much similar to NIST. It uses a different language, and it's a similar structure, but different enough that it's meaningful for the CEOs, right? But more importantly, there's an adaptation. More importantly, this isn't enough to build true cyber resilience in an organization. And we'll get to that in a second. But before we do that, and I wasn't sure whether to include it or not, let's double click on that bow tie model, right? And make that relevant for the world of cybersecurity, right? And I mean, you have the slides available. There's a lot of information out there, but this is how it looks like in practice, how organizations in the world of cybersecurity can use that bow tie model meaningfully to build cyber resilience based on the language of anticipating, withstanding, responding, and adapting. There's a couple of illustrative controls. But what I wanted to get at, and that is maybe even more important than that, is even if organizations do that successfully, they can still fail in building cyber resilience. And that is because there's a few elements that are missing in that.
Yeah, so you know, again, going back to the CEO research, I think 3 things that I found interesting. Question 1, is cyber important to you? Oh, topmost. What are you doing about cyber? I've increased my spend quadrupled, tenfold, increased my cyber team, hired a fabulous CISO. Do you feel more secure? Nope. So this is not sustainable. You know, you cannot keep putting money into something that you can't convert to some feeling of business benefit, strategic advantage, competitive advantage. And this is where I think the primary activities, we spend a lot of time. I don't think we do enough of anticipate. We start anticipate from the threat definition, but there is a step between what is happening around the world, where capital is flowing, where data is flowing, that gives you an indication of, because money, hackers, bad guys will follow where the capital is, right, where the data is. So that step, anticipate, withstand, respond, and I don't know if there's enough on the adapt. So that's one side of it. But you could do all of this, yet you could fail, as Manuel said, because you don't do enabling activities. Enabling activities don't cost as much, but they can be as much a reason for failure. So first and foremost is strategy. If you don't have a cyber resilience strategy that you discuss with your CEO, if it's not linked to the business strategy, hey, Mr. CEO, we are looking to expand in Asia. These are the new risks from a cyber perspective that brings to us. This is my cyber resilience strategy for the next 3-4 years. And this is how I'm addressing it. I mean, I really always associate cyber resilience with health. Imagine if you were here and you had 50 people telling you that they had the best medicine to make you taller, thinner, healthier, whatever, muscular, not muscular, whatever, and you didn't actually have a roadmap. For me, or for somebody, they want to run a marathon. For somebody else, they just want to lead a healthy life. Somebody's 70, somebody's 20. So there is a roadmap that you have. You have indicators, and then you see progress. You need that approach to cyber resilience. What is the company's goal? How does this enable that goal? What does it protect against? So strategy is really important. Cost nothing. It's a big advocate of business language. Please make it simple. As a CEO, I can tell you there are times, again, my general counsel will speak to me and tell me so much about, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't understand it. But the moment he can end with, so look, Rashmi, this is where the problems are. This is what I suggest we do. This is the risk we're going to have. He's handing over the decision of risk appetite to me, and I'm comfortable taking that. Same thing on finance, should be higher, should we spend more, all that stuff. So CEOs know how to do it, but we have to help them do it. Just telling them the problem without some softness in the dialogue is a bit difficult. Culture, again, a huge, so the thing I always worry about is imagine 8 billion people in the world spending 60% of their time digitally. There is no tool that can fix it. There is no tool that can fix it. And this is going to be society, right? So it has to come from within. I always share the example, I grew up in India, and as a young girl growing up in India, risk was in my DNA. Nobody had to tell me. I knew where I could walk, where I shouldn't walk, what to wear, what time is a good time to go out, who not to talk to. It's how I grew up. My daughter grew up in Singapore. She does not have that risk in her DNA because very safe, 0 crime rate. So if you're going so rapidly towards digital transformation, so much in a hurry to reap the benefits of digitalization, you really have to make sure that you're building the culture of everybody understanding that being cyber resilient is existential to this building, to this business. It's very important. Organizational design, this is my favorite topic because how many banks have we worked with? Fabulous spend, can talk to you about every technology, have separate VC funds, everything. They will know every technology in the market. But when there's an attack, you know where they fail? Organization. Chain of command is unclear. What does the COO do? What does the CI do? What is the risk officer? Where is the governance? Everything, when you are in the middle of a crisis, everything is about speed and chain of command. So you have to really test the organization. Who else has an opinion who may suddenly slow you down? So organization, for me, is a huge, there's so much discussion, should the CISO report the CEO, to the CRO, to the chief risk officer, COO, chief risk officer, CFO, obviously CIO, CTO. But in the end, you have to test it for your organization that you cannot lose time because your organization design is not prepared. Risk and governance, as I said, ultimately cyber, when we have enough data, when we have enough experience, when we've all learned, I hope not always through living through a crisis, that's the time you can have a conversation which says, listen, these are the 3 weaknesses we have that we have to first and foremost systematically address. There'll be new stuff coming up. There'll be other things we can't cover, but this is how we're going to approach it. And ecosystem, I think you've seen it all, like last 2 years, every attack has come from outside the perimeter. Now, what is the perimeter anymore, right? So the ownership of the CEO to engage in the dialogue, and industries, you look at the energy, oil and gas, you look at finance is probably the most advanced, insurance. Really, the CEOs are together discussing the risk, sharing threat intel, what we call collective defense, sharing alerts, sharing the analytics from the data that they're seeing. So collective, for the CEO to be part of the ecosystem, for the CISO to encourage the CEO to sit with other CEOs of their industry on this topic is also very important. So I think primary activities, great. Where a lot of the time goes, and I think frankly a bit of the fear comes because it's mysterious, it goes so quickly into tech. And so you have to just balance that out. And the enabling, which really talks about resiliency, which is where the CEO is most comfortable. And then the third area is measuring outcomes. We are going to a place where people will ask for ROI. I know many of you are probably already experiencing this. There is nothing in the world that is a black box where money and people can go without a clear articulation of why is this making my business better, faster, strategically more important, exciting, competitive. That's the positive. And right now, CEOs are just not seeing it. So when money gets tighter, as it is getting, that will come up a lot. So that's sort of the framework. We've got a lot more insights on this, very happy to share it with you. So key takeaway, just cyber resilience, better than cybersecurity, just something that the CEO understands better. Don't always focus on the primary activities. I know a lot of that actually do keep us secure, but you can do it all, but still not be resilient because of the enabling activities. Help the CEO become better, not just at blind trust, but informed trust, speak their language, talk about their strategy, understand their vision of growth. Growth is what CEOs want, right? And really help the co-responsibility by getting them more involved, not in a mysterious deep tech, let me introduce the latest hacker, fascinating, always lovely to hear, doesn't help you get wiser. So those are some of the key takeaways. Once again, thanks for giving us your time. Really appreciate it. We have this published on the ISTARI website. You can download the report, keep the conversation going. We will do a follow-up. I'll absorb this. We are covered in Forbes, Fortune, Wall Street Journal, number of media outlets. We're starting to engage, and then maybe after a few months, we'll take stock and see what next. How do we make this simpler? Any questions? I think we have about 4 or 5 minutes left, but otherwise LinkedIn, email, all good.
Feel free to also reach out. We're passionate about this topic, so anybody who engages, we appreciate that. I mean, for those of you who don't want to scan the QR code, it is a cybersecurity conference after all. I've also included the bit.ly link.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, we've got a question, yes.
Sorry.
Thank you for the presentation. In the research that you did you find many CEOs planning to expand or shrink their funding and support for cybersecurity?
Very good question, actually. Budget came up repeatedly, and in the report there's a whole section about cybersecurity budget, and it is actually one of the more provocative sections in the report, because CEOs, more than one, use the language of unlimited budget. Now, whenever we present that to a room of cybersecurity professionals, they get angry at us, right? Because they say that's not true. But the problem that CEOs have is, and I'm quoting one, was he said, well, I'm not really in a position to say no. And I guess there's differences in industry. I mean, finance has a lot of money, but other industries like manufacturing have less money. But it's interesting that CEOs didn't feel like they should consciously limit spend in cybersecurity.
But this is not what the CISO told us.
No. So.
They said, really? They said that? So.
I've actually got a few physical copies. If anybody wants to grab one on the way out, I'm more than happy to give that to you as well. So. Yeah.
Thank you for this. Are you able to provide any insight into the background of all of the CEOs?
Good question. I do think we can do it because actually, again, you had in the past CEOs who often came from finance or legal. Now there's lots of CEOs who come from IT, but it's a good question. I think we can scan it and we can share.
Send us a note.
Good point, yeah. Not yet, sorry, a CISO who's become a CEO, but that will be. That will happen.
Thank you so much. Absolutely fantastic research. I just wanted to mention an interesting observation that's coming out of some academic work starting to be done in Australia, and that's around the word resilience itself. We're starting to see actually, at least in our part of the world, a little bit of resilience fatigue starting to creep in around the use of that word, particularly given COVID, given the circumstances we've had in Australia pre-COVID of catastrophic bushfires. People are starting to associate that a little bit with synonymous with toughen up. So I just thought I'd put that out there in the sense which is it was great to see you have some other words in there around adaptive and some considerations. So not necessarily an esoteric conversation because as we're trying to capture that attention and keep that goodwill moving forward, I just thought I'd mention, and whether that was anything you had actually seen in your global discussions around the use of the word.
Yeah, again, really good question. We didn't see, I don't think we experienced that. But I think the problem is very often you take a word and the next thing is you've broken it up into 55 tools, 25 different services, and then suddenly it becomes a burden. Yeah, but it's a good point. The idea more is of this continuum of evolving. I call it the foundation to a digital business. You've got to keep strengthening it, and it's not going to happen with Band-Aid. It's going to happen with a set of primary activities, enabling, and it's going to happen by routine. It's not knee-jerk.
And just to add, I think resilience has been used quite a lot, right? I think part of the reason for that, why it's so attractive, is because businesses need to be resilient against all sorts of different crises. There's financial resilience, there's business resilience, there's something about business continuity, there's cyber resilience, and I think that's why the word resilience has been used so much. It actually comes from the world of biology and psychology. I don't know if you know this, but developed in, now I've got to stop, but developed in the 80s. So I think there's an interesting trajectory just from the word in and of itself. But anyway,
we have a question, but maybe we'll go outside.
Do we?
Yeah. Outside.
Okay. We've got a few copies, so feel free to just grab one. Thank you.
Thank you.